Ladies and gentlemen, it is the 6th round of action at the World Chess Championship between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi, and I'm not going to spoil anything about this game. I would expect that most of you have already gotten a chance to see it, and if you haven't, this was a classic. This was one of the greatest chess games, one of the greatest battles ever seen. It broke so many records, including the longest World Championship game ever in history. And yeah, I mean, wow, I'm exhausted just watching it. That's the best intro I can give you. We've had 5 draws thus far, and now Magnus begins this game with the move d4. We have the third game with Magnus being with the white pieces, and he opts to go for d4. He's done d4, he's done e4, and we have knight f6. And perhaps the biggest surprise of this game already begins on the third move, as Magnus chooses to employ a Fianchetto setup, which probably will become a Catalan, but doing it in this specific move order is very important because it means that he has something up his sleeve. First of all, it actually allows black to develop the light-scored bishop, which is one of the reasons that people employ it, because it leads to some dynamic and interesting and imbalanced games. But we have e6 now played by Jan, so he is sticking to his guns. He's like, yo, if this bozo tries something that, you know, isn't the main line in this setup, I'm still gonna get a good position. And if he goes back to the Catalan, well, at least we're in my preparation. So we have all those moves, right? And here, if you're a strong player, you're gonna play the move c4. I mean, if you're a 2700-2800 guy, normally you're gonna play c4. I mean, you gotta go for the Catalan. There is no way for white to prove an advantage otherwise. And Magnus plays b3. According to the database, this has never been played by anyone over 2,700 FIDE to try for an advantage. Now, there might be transpositions, but this particular move order has never been employed in a classical game by anyone rated over 2,700 FIDE, which means they don't believe in it. They only believe in the mainline Catalan. And it's even more interesting that after the move c5, which is very principled, d and c pawns go together in these kind of structures, Magnus did not opt to develop his pieces. He opted to take, allowing this bishop to centralize itself. And after the move c4, he didn't even do anything about this pawn, but he pinned it. Meaning he didn't take it, rather he pinned it to this bishop. As early as the 10th move, the 9th move of this game, Magnus offered a pawn sacrifice to Jan. He said, you can take my pawn. You are going to be up a pawn, Jan. On move 10, with the black pieces, go ahead and take it. But you haven't developed your queen side, and the Catalan pressure of my position against the development of your queen side is going to be crucial for me developing chances in this game. And Jan here went for a deep think, because obviously this is like, I mean, he's walking through a field now. He's got to kind of find his way. So he thinks for a while, and he plays knight c6. And if you're wondering, by the way, thinking for a while, where are the clocks? I'm going to keep you updated on the clock situation of this game. I don't really want to use the clock page as much as I love chess.com events, because every time I put in a variation, the board changes color. And I don't want to spend this entire recap going, that didn't really, and then changing the board back and forth with the colors. I don't know, whatever. But that aside, knight takes c4, the pawn has been given back, and here, black has 2 distinct ways of equalizing. The way that looks most human is to just play in the center with the move e5. This move will liberate the light-squared bishop in a very non-standard way in the Catalan. This is not always supposed to happen. The problem is that white immediately jumps on this pawn, and I am sure, as well as some of the commentators, that this is what they wanted. This is what they wanted Magnus to get, this kind of a very kind of like a move-by-move razor's edge position to try to attack the center pawn, right? As Jan tries to finish his development, something like this, boom. Now, boom, you have to take maybe with the queen to give up the center pawn, or try to damage your structure but keep this. I don't know, probably you're gonna keep it, right? But then if you keep the pawn, then we get something like this. It's a little overextended by black, right? Damage pawn structure. I understand you have the bishop pair, but Jan played b5, which is a shocking move. He's going to put his bishop on b7, but he is opening up himself to such weakenings, right? If that's even a word. And Magnus went for a think. And Magnus, in turn, thought for like 15, 20 minutes on what to do. And at this point, there was that discussion. I don't know if you remember this from some of the earlier games, but there was this discussion of, do the teams of the players before the game, because they're looking at so much material, you cannot possibly feed it all to the grandmaster who's going to go play the games. Do they give you some of it, but if something else happens that looks completely not human, do you just not even tell them about it, right? Because you're like, it's Magnus. Magnus will figure it out. That's what they suspected about the move b5. Because after knight e5, there is knight b4, winning a very crucial tempo. You have to attack this queen, because if you allowed white to just belligerently destroy you on this diagonal, you would have been in some trouble. So now we have queen b2 and bishop b7, and Jan has found his way out of the opening maze. Now, what makes this position a little boring to begin with? Everything is the same in terms of pawns. A, B, E, F, G, H, completely symmetrical pawn structure, and once you kind of untangle in the opening against something annoying like the Catalan, you're just going to probably make a draw. But there's still life in this position. Admittedly, when I was seeing this morning, Lucy had just woken up. She was like, how's the game going? I'm like, Jan kind of found his way out. Probably they're going to play a little bit more, and then they're going to make a draw. And, well, that was really cutting it short, because this game went quite a long time. So Magnus plays a3. He also here could have gone for bishop to g5, which a lot of the commentators were talking about, and just chopping down this knight. It's a very common Catalan idea, but more on that later because it actually happens. Knight c6, knight d3. So now we're going to have a dance of horses and bishops. We're looking, right, to make like a beneficial exchange, which at the highest level would be the difference between equality and a better position. The bishop moves out of the way. Now we have this, and Jan plays rook d8, and really the only way that white has to play forward is to take this knight. I mean, white can also bring the rooks. Like, both players can play rook d1, rook c1. If you ever wonder which rook is supposed to go to which file, in this case, the f rook moved to d8 because the a rook can go here. Whereas if you move the a rook, this just, where's this rook going, right? I mean, it doesn't quite make sense. You want both rooks to have a future. You don't want to spend all your college tuition money as parents on the older kid, and then the younger kid has to, go become a janitor. Although in families with a big enough gap, the older kid ends up getting a job and paying for the younger kid. I'm just saying. Anyway, rook d8. Bishop takes f6. And now Jan does not trade queens, but instead takes with the pawn. Okay, officially, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have something exciting. We are going to have our first imbalance of this game. Black has the bishop pair, but has a compromised pawn structure. And white has Magnus Carlsen playing with the white pieces. I think that's a pretty important kind of distinction to make. He brings his rook to the middle, and Jan can play forward in two ways. He can jump his knight into the middle, which looks very appetizing to make some exchanges, clear off the board, or he can march forward with his e-pawn to try to fork the knights. If he plays e5, he allows Magnus to outflank the pawn, and that becomes a very juicy square. Of course, then he can jump his knight into the middle. Jan says, no. We're not going to make any pawn weaknesses. I'm a Soviet chess player. I mean, that doesn't exist in the year 2021, but I'm a Russian chess player. And we're going to make some trades like this, and now it's game on as I transfer my queen into the territory. Instant replay. The move knight d4 was going to get rid of the Catalan bishop, which is usually a win in these kind of positions. And, obviously we have a couple of exchanges there. Queen b7, very important to note, he doesn't block the check. This move is greatly weakening his structure for basically no reason at all. So king g1, queen e4, and queen c2. And now we begin the middle game, the middle to end game phase of the game, as the players have traded off 3 minor pieces. Well, so very difficult decision to make by Jan is, does he play this move? And rook c8 basically leads to a sacrifice of 2 rooks for the queen. I mean, sacrifice is a strong word, but 2 rooks for the queen. That's really going to be the eternal question of this middle game, whether or not it's going to happen, right? And Jan chooses not to do this just yet. Jan chooses to play on the queen side, just expand on the queen side, control the movement of the knight anywhere. His pieces kind of stand very strongly here. And, we have rook d1, king g7, and here Magnus thought for over 20 minutes. That was very strange for the commentators. They could not, for the life of them, understand why the move e3 was not getting played. Many of them, actually. I mean, everybody. Like Vichy, Geary, Svidler and Kramnik, Fabiano and Robert Hess. I mean, everybody was like, yo, e3? If I didn't name somebody, I'm sorry. I was trying to, follow as many of the streams as possible. e3, right? Like, what is happening after e3? Well, After e3, if the bishop retreats somewhere, I mean, white just seems to have relatively easy play. Maybe you try to trade the queens and pressure the queen side. Maybe you drive the knight out here to trade some queen. I mean, you got to be careful, obviously, as all the pieces see each other, but everybody was screaming for this move e3 and to potentially transfer the queen behind the pawn. Magnus thought and played rook d2. A lot of these moves just look, I mean, they look like you can click out of the live broadcast because it just doesn't matter. I mean, there's going to be an awkward tension between the players, and then they're going to just, you know, it's going to be a draw. But now rook c8. Now rook c8. This invites some interesting stuff. Jan chooses to enter queen bishop 6 versus 2 rooks knight 6. And he plays the move queen to d5. Queen to d5 pressures this pawn and baits Magnus into either pushing it forward, or I don't really know if he has an alternative, to be honest. I mean, he can play like very passively, but he can't in this case because bishop takes f2 check, king f2 and queen here. So this is a very annoying thing. And actually, Jan must have been feeling quite good. I mean, Jan's like, yo, this is fantastic. And when you play b4, now a4, very important in endgames to create weaknesses for your opponent, especially on the same color square as the bishop, because then you can infiltrate in the future. I mean, and Jan is now 3 squares away from promoting, right? Like, if he gets rid of the a pawn, I mean, this is like very serious winning chances for Jan. Spoiler alert, the computer is saying 0-0-0 the entire time, which is why, as much as the engine wants to sit there like the smart kid, the engine is like the 12th grader that goes to a 3rd grade math class and tries to tell everybody they know the right answer. Like, no one cares, you look stupid, no one asked for your opinion, all right? You're way too big for us mortals, get out of here, all right? That's what the engine kind of looks like. And, you know, we got e3. And this is where wicked complications begin happening, okay? And in a move, I'm going to also tell you one more thing. So there's a very wild line here where the bishop can go to die. If you take, it's this, and if you take with the rook, I take this, and I'm threatening to infiltrate. And you really do not have the option to play super passively with the rooks, because check, right? So what Magnus would have to do is play rook c5, queen d6, and go for a position like this, where they now have to trade all the pawns, something like queen takes a3, rook b5, and there's going to be like a desperate attempt by black to hang on to this pawn, right? Rook c1, something like this. I mean, it's like a very, very odd and scary position, but maybe something like this occurs. And in all likelihood, it is a draw, but it's actually Magnus who's playing for a win, because Magnus will need to go for one of these pawns. And sacrificing your queen for the 2 rooks will land you in an endgame where it's 3 versus 4 pawns, which is most likely just lost. I mean, so black can't really do this unless black is 100% certain it's fine, which is why Jan played bishop e5. And here Magnus spent the rest of his time, not all of it, and played h4. The move h4 was played with 3 minutes and 3 seconds remaining on the clock. Magnus Carlsen has 10 moves to make with 3 minutes to go and no bonus time. And he's playing the position for a win because the guy's a lunatic, or he's the GOAT. I don't know, it's one or the other, or both. h4 is a wicked move. The point of h4, just so you understand, is to infiltrate the king. So, for example, let's say you go for this bishop b2 now, right? And I go for my rook c5, or something along these lines. We might get a position that looks kind of similar, right? We might get a position that looks kind of similar. However, if after h4 you come in with the queen, which is probably the original idea, now we will get takes, and I'm not going to care about this being lost. I'm going for f7. I'm going to chuck my entire queen side to you. Takes, rook dd7, queen takes b4, rook f7, and this pawn blocks the king's escape. And there is a chance that the king gets locked in a cage with 2 very angry tower-looking pieces, and the game is simply lost. There are ways you can accidentally mate yourself. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that is possible. And the move h4 is really important that this king also gets breathing room. And the move h4 is also very important because you might bait your opponent into overcommitting with h5. h5 is a standard antidote to most h4 moves, particularly in middle games. But if you allow your opponent to play the move h5 to block your attack, that pawn might become a liability. How? To moves like knight f4 in the future. After the move h5, Magnus played king to h2. He now has 9 moves, and still 2 minutes and about 50 seconds to make the remaining moves. Nepo has about, the reason I'm not saying Nepo's time is because he has like 15, 20 minutes at this point, right? So Nepo here spends his time and goes for bishop b2, rather than entering the 2 rooks on the 7th variation. Because the thing is, if Jan does nothing, at some point or another, Magnus will come back with rook c5 and just start chopping. He will chop, he will chop, he will chop. 2 rooks and 4 pawns is winning against the queen in 3. It just is. I mean, the rooks are gonna do, unless there's a perpetual check. And there might be, but we get bishop b2. And now, after rook c5, queen d6, the chess world realized Magnus Carlsen is winning in this position. The engines went completely ballistic with the variation here. If Magnus plays rook c to c2, this move is completely insane. The point of this move is to make the bishop take, and now you go justify h4, h5. I mean, so far it kind of makes sense. So far it makes sense. But the winning variation here is nothing short of lunacy. The engine now recommends going back to f8. We have rook d7 delaying the capture with check, instead threatening this one to fork the pieces. King g8, rook dc7, threatening a skewer on the back rank. Now the queen comes and takes. Now we have check, still not taking anything. Now we take, now we drop back, and ladies and gentlemen, the engine at the end of all this finds a way to coordinate the rooks and have a passed h-pawn, and the knight is super strong, and white is winning. But this is not the craziest thing I have ever seen in my life. Rook cc2 is winning for this other variation. Bishop takes pawn, knight f4, and if black calls the bluff and takes the entire queen side away from you, in this position we have the most disgusting engine line anyone has ever seen. Anyone has ever seen. And it goes rook to d7, black plays e5 attacking the knight, knight takes h5, the king is attacking the knight, and it's trapped. Rook to c6. Just pause here for a moment and appreciate this. This is the dumbest thing, but the smartest and most... It blows my mind. Magnus had to see this to be winning after rook cc2. King takes h5, rook takes f6, and it's just a net. This is a net. It's a web. There is nothing that black can do to prevent getting mated. Nothing. It doesn't matter. You can bring the queen. What's going to happen is I'm just going to push my pawns. Your queen and bishop are in each other's way and are not doing anything. Completely mind-blowing stuff. Rook cc2, but Magnus plays rook d1. Oh my god, Magnus has blundered it back. Now Jan is playing for an advantage. We have bishop a3, rook takes b5, queen d7. Magnus Carlsen's time is ticking. I mean, the man has 2 minutes. He has 2 minutes to make his remaining 6 moves, or he runs out of time. But Jan's time is also ticking. Jan has to be super precise, though. He's got about 8 minutes to make the remaining 4 or 5 moves. But Jan is all like, oh my god, this guy only has 2 minutes on the clock. This is completely nuts. Rook goes to c5. Now, Jan can play bishop takes b4. If knight b4, of course, queen takes rook. He's choosing not to do it, because in this position, and actually what you're going to see in a moment, there is a crazy defensive resource for black, for Jan, that he misses. He misses it twice. In this position, Jan can take on b4. It's the same thing. Bishop takes b4. Knight b4 is not possible, but now it is. But now it is. The threat is to go here and also here, because the rook is attacking the queen. Bishop a3, rook a1, and in this position, queen g4. Look at this move. Queen to g4, hitting the rook by preventing the other rook from taking and defending the pawn at the same time. Queen g4 is a triple exclamation mark move, played with 2 minutes before time control. Jan could have gotten to this position and created a legitimate winning chance for himself. But Jan, after rook c2, did not take b4. And even if you don't see queen g4, the commentators were shocked that bishop takes b4 was not played. It's a move that you just play. I mean, you don't even think about anything else, right? Fabi was like, just play the move. I mean, it's just a free pawn, right? But Jan was trying not to play the obvious move because Magnus doesn't have a lot of time. Magnus is ready for bishop b4. Jan plays queen d5. But now, Magnus creates a fortress. He's just in time. If you play bishop takes b4 in this position, then I can probably play like rook b2 and take this pawn and the bishop. And Jan is not 100% sure he can hold that endgame. So the dust settles on move 40 with e4, knight out to c5. We have queen b4, and on the 40th move of the game, with less than 15 seconds to go, Magnus can play this. to hold it together, and black has no moves. And now you threaten to take, and win the bishop back, something like this. And this might be white playing for a win, because I told you, with the two rooks, as long as there's no perpetual check, you're gonna get to one of those pawns. But Magnus misses it because he doesn't have enough time. The dust settles on the 40th move. The players get the extra hour. Now let's play some chess. Okay, rook c2, bishop back to f8. This pawn is going to march. You're not going to prevent that from happening. I would like to show you one of the stupidest engine lines here, because you're 20 minutes into my recap. I love you so much. I don't want to make this extremely long, but this is just a beautiful game. So hopefully we go about 10, 15 more minutes. Please be patient with me. Here there's a line, rook to c8, a3, rook d8. a2, rook f8, a1 queen, rook h8, threatening a checkmate. But there is king g6, and it's a draw. It's a draw. This king is stuck in a box, but black can't do anything with the two queens. Look at this. g4 takes, check, here, here. Look at this box. This is completely ludicrous. Knight g3 is a mate. Knight d6 is mate, but black has a check, sacrificing the second queen for a rook. Oh my, and by the way, for the knight, because that was a counter check, and this is a draw. I mean, imagine this is how the game ended, but it's not. It's anything but. You might need to pause at this point. You might need to go pick up your kid from school. I don't know. You might need to go pick up your parent from adult daycare. I don't know. Knight c5, queen b5. And for the remainder of this phase of the game, moves 40 to 60 before the players get their remaining 15 minutes on the clock. We got Magnus finding a way forward. So this is what he did. Magnus danced around a little bit and put his rooks on the A-file in the most passive way. What? Well, the idea is black still remains with massive pawn liabilities because of the way he played the game. He made the conscious decision to play gf6 in the early game. He played the conscious decision of h5. But Magnus knows that there are many transformations of positions still left to go. Knight versus bishop is a losing trade for black. If black plays here and here, we already know that endgame is lost, so that's not going to happen. But what if, as the game goes on, Magnus finds a way to reroute his knight in such a way that it targets that pawn, right? Something like knight to c2. Well, knight to c2 would be nice, right? It would be nice. Let's just go back a move, like around here, knight c2, or in this position, knight to c2. The thing about knight c2 is that Jan is going to attack the rook. That's the problem. And then if you take, I take like this, right? So maybe Jan should have played something, I mean, just kind of like prepared himself for something like this, right? But then, rather than just shuffling back and forth, king h6, king h7, like king h6, king h7 the entire game, we got this instead, queen e4. And Magnus Carlsen sacrifices the rook for the pawn, inviting this endgame. Bishop takes a3, rook takes a3. Rook, knight, and pawn. Rook, knight, and pawn for the queen. This is what he is inviting Jan to defend. Jan, clearly not really enjoying this position from a visual standpoint, chooses not to go for this. Instead, what Jan does is he sees this, and his idea is to take on h4, which does seem like progress, because after king to g1, it's clear he will try to trade the h-pawn for the g-pawn, like this, opening up the king. That would be a nice win for him. But let's not also forget, the G and H files are open for two straightaway attackers with the white pieces, right? Magnus Carlsen knows that. So queen e4, and now we have rook a4. The next part of this game, they have 5 moves to make. They both have about a few minutes. They both have a few minutes to make these moves, right? Because on move 60, you get the 15 minutes, but you also get 30-second bonus, right? So now we have bishop to e5, knight e2. Jan's like, I'm not taking your rook. Queen c2. We have rook a2, queen b3, king g2, queen d5 check, f3. Fabiano Caruana called this move irresponsible. People were surprised by this move because the truth is it's an overly committal pawn move. Why would you play a move that makes every pawn stand like this, whereas if you create this nice structure, everything is protected? f3. Now, I'm not like blaming Fabiano for saying that. I'm just saying that throughout the commentary of this game, There were so many different thought processes and deep dives into what might be the slightest of inaccuracies. The entire time the computer is sitting there smoking a fat Cuban cigar going, stupid humans, it's 000. The whole game is 000. I mean, it's depressing. It's like looking at the pulse in a hospital, just boop, right? It's just flatlining. I mean, oh, it's just crazy stuff. Now we have queen d1, f4, bishop c7. Now it's move 61. Now nobody can lose on time. The players get their extra 15 minutes. And here we go. We have king to f2, bishop b6. How is Magnus ever going to make progress? First of all, he unbinds his rooks, which people thought looked ugly, but was the top stockfish idea. The rook now sits comfortably here. The king is shielded by the knight. Now there is another idea to go down to the e-file and potentially harass this king, which is a problem. Magnus keeps poking and prodding. And also what he does later in this game is he finds an absolutely insane way to go after this bishop. Now, very quickly, I would like to show you a stockfish line, king to g6. Are you ready for this? Rook here. As the king sees that the rooks are coming into his castle, he jumps out the window. This king in this position after rook e8 has a possibility to go king g4 here and king h3. I'm not joking. That is a stockfish line and the evaluation stays 000. I mean, computer was suggesting some of the some mega drugs type of variations in this game. King to h3. Oh, the rooks are coming? I just gotta bust out of this one. Parachute, no parachute, king doesn't care. I mean, that is one of the suggestions. That is not human. We have king g7, and now Jan plays an extremely committal move. Jan plays the move f5. Supported by computer, absolutely supported. The point is you prevent this, and you're gonna stand potentially a little bit forward, not allowing yourself to get bullied on the back rank, right? And in the future, you're going to play this move h4 most likely. The whole point of white's position here is to load up the cannons together on one of these pawns. That remains the game plan. But how can you accomplish that when the only thing protecting your king is the horse, and the only thing protecting your king is the rook? You don't get everything. You can't. So Magnus begins the next stage of the game, which is bullying the bishop. He dances around, immediately kind of throwing this bishop off. He comes back, and now rook e5. And now the question is, Jan, remember that pawn you brought over there? How are you going to protect this pawn? Queen to b3. You can't take me. But now he plays this move again, and it's not so easy to just repeat moves back and forth because the constant threat of there. Or, potentially in the future, some rook c3 move. Or potentially in the future, this bishop is going to get touched up. Maybe the bishop is going to get like a bit paralyzed. It's not easy. The queen can't protect everything. It's trying. It's really trying its best, but it can't protect everything. So, queen d5. Rook c8. Oh, back to this idea. Now queen goes to h1. Nice little infiltration here. The queen gets kicked out. Magnus targets the bishop. The bishop slides back. But where is it going? Where is it going? Because now the queen has to desperately defend the bishop. Or does it? Does it? Wait a minute. Now it goes after the rook. But we have this, targeting this pawn. And the bishop is hanging. And the bishop has no retreating square. So now the bishop has to be defended. But uh-oh, you just surrendered the b5 square to me, and I'm x-ray attacking f5. This is a problem. Jan is fast enough. They repeat once, so Magnus gains some clock time. He's fast enough to get this. But Magnus Carlsen sacrifices his rook. He's now sacked the queen, sacked, and the rook, and he picks up the bishop, and the next phase of the game begins. Rook, knight, 2 pawns versus the queen. Jan's winning chances, negative. Against you, 95%. Against me, I wouldn't lose this with white. Would I win it? Probably not. Let's see if Magnus Carlsen can bring this home. This might be the most exciting draw you have ever seen in your life, or it might be something better, but you already know it broke the record for the longest World Championship game ever played, which before this game was 124 moves. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, so at this point, what you're seeing is 2 players with about 3 minutes on their clock shuffling back and forth to gain that time to make a committal decision. That is what you're seeing. This part, we don't necessarily have to analyze too deeply. All you have to understand is the only way white can make progress here is by pushing the pawns. That's it. No one's going to blunder a queen. No one's going to get checkmated. Black's queen is standing around harassing this king, keeping the knight close to it. Black also needs to not allow e4, e5 to happen. And if e4, e5 happens, Black needs to deal with the consequences. So what does Magnus do? Magnus tries to find a way to coordinate and protect his king at the same time, right? Also, you cannot repeat the position 3 times. Not even back and forth. There's a rule in chess: if the same position occurs on move 85, 90, and 95 because of pointless shuffling, that's a draw. Did you know that? Now you do. Did you already know that? Okay, well, you're 30 minutes in the recap with me, all right? And I've been talking nonstop. I got to make this kind of exciting, break the fourth wall every now and then. Rook c2, right? So a few times around here, the players almost repeated. It happened a few times. Knight e6. Now Magnus is going for a new approach, but he comes right back. By the way, we have crossed 100 moves. We are already in the 100 move territory, but I told you this part of the game is trying to break through with e4. You might be waiting. Notice what happened. Rook d4, knight e2. This is the only successful configuration that you are going to get. Magnus Carlsen has found it. So did Robert Hess, by the way. Knight e2, rook d4. Why was this not possible with the knight on f3? Because whenever the queen pulled up behind the king, g3 did not have a guard. The knight on e2 protects the rook and allows e4, e5 to happen. So knight e2. Now Jan here is like, okay, e4 is coming. So as e4 is going to come, what I need to do is I need to go over here and trade my h-pawn. That way, I can attack the king from all 3 directions. Down the middle, on the right, and on the left. My h-pawn could be a liability, so I gotta get rid of it now. But Magnus found his configuration, right? The 50 move rule resets. 50 move rule, no captures or pawn advances in 50 moves. The game is a draw. So the queen rotates over to h1. Rook d7, king g8, and it takes a little bit of time, but we have the trade. And at this point, Magnus is going to bring his king to safety, and all the forces are gonna go up together. And either Jan will defend this position or he will lose. That's it. There is no in between. Magnus is going to rally the troops together, fight against the queen, the terrifying piece, and they're going to march forward. Jan will either find a way to block these pawns, put his king in a blockading square, and potentially walk past them, or he will lose. So what does he do? He tries to bring his king and queen together to the center. Very like iconic movie moment here. He gives the check. Now, important, chess has been solved with 7 pieces or less. Engines were made called table bases that mathematically solve the game of chess. They were saying this position is a draw. There are 7 pieces on the board. They are saying that with optimal computer level play, the game is a draw. That doesn't mean anything to Magnus Carlsen or Jan Nepomniachtchi. And as of move 124, after some checks, this is the 125th move. This is the longest game in World Championship history. Can Magnus Carlsen win it? Notice that Magnus has moved king and knight together. The king is obviously not going to march down the middle. The king is going to march on the side and hide where little bunkers with the pawns or the knight or the rook, and the rook is going to push everybody forward. So Jan plays queen b3. We have rook to d5, king to e7, rook e5 check, couple of checks, and now this is the perfect situation. The king is cut just down the f file. Magnus Carlsen has played e5. Jan Nepomniachtchi has one and only one way to defend this position now. And this is what the commentators predicted. The table base is going to give you 10 options until the human mind takes over. Then there will be 7 options to play with optimal play for a draw. Then there will be 5, and now there is 2. And in reality, there is 1. The queen must stand on this diagonal. Why? Because the king will march up this way. The queen can harass the king and the knight from the back. It also cuts the opportunity to move the pawns forward together. You must play apparently queen c2 or queen b1. Since the game happened, there might have been more analysis on this on table base, but I believe that is what they said during the broadcast. If I'm wrong, then they're wrong, and then everybody's wrong. That is what they were saying. Jan plays queen e6. Jan Nepomniachtchi is now losing Game 6 of the World Chess Championship match. Magnus Carlsen comes up the h-file, and all of a sudden it becomes very clear we have gone past the point of no return. Queen takes f5, knight g7. Jan here realizes it here as well. The pieces have simply gone too far, so he plays here. Rook f7. You still cannot take, because this becomes a losing king and pawn endgame. You must know your king and pawn endgames. This is a losing one. Rook f7, king d8, f5, and in this position, threatening the walk of the king behind his pieces and the advancement of e7 and e8, Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned. And Magnus Carlsen wins Game 6 of the World Chess Championship match, breaking the record for the longest game ever. This game lasted nearly 8 hours, and I don't have anything left to say about this game. If that didn't leave an impression on you for the remainder of the match, then that is a you problem. Thank you so much for making it with me. 35 minutes in this recap, potentially 8 hours of this game. That was absolutely incredible. That man is the GOAT for a reason, and it is going to be a titanic task for Jan to come back from this game.